We're on committee reports. So Committee Chair Moss, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
All right, thank you. Agenda item, excuse me, we are 11. So agenda item 11.2, I move that the board continues R277-420 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor that the board continues R277-420, aiding financially distressed school districts on second and final reading. Those in favor say aye. Oh, sorry. No, I have no lights. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, agenda item number 11 point, I'm sorry, I'm going to pull my hard copy. No, we are agenda item 10. So this is 10.3, state-supported, voted local levy, board local levy, and reading improvement program. This is up only for continuation. And I move that the board, the board approves and continues R277-422, state-supported voted local levy, board local levy, and reading improvement program for continuation on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Seeing no discussion, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously.
All right, another one with slight amendment, action item number 11.4. I was right the first time. It's section 11, sorry. R277-454. I move that the board continue on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor that the board continues R277-454, construction management of school building projects, draft 1 on second and final reading. Seeing no discussion, those in favor say, Board Member Lear.
You tried to escape me.
No, I didn't. I checked for lights and none were there.
I'm reading the agenda and it says amendment and continuation. Member Moss, Chair Moss says continuation. So I'm wondering if that was a intentional.
Member Moss,
I
or Chair Moss.
thought I said amendment first, but I realized when I stated the motion, I said continuation. So there is a slight change in some of the definitions of construction management and the organization of the different functions of construction management, which I think Deputy Jones could speak to. As far as I'm aware, no substantive change, but it is an amendment continuation. Sorry.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, do we need to change the wording of the motion if there is an amendment and continuation? Instead of saying that the board continues, would we say the board amends and continues? Our parliamentary expert is saying yes. So there's a motion on the floor that the board amends and continues R277-454, construction management of school building projects, draft 1 on second and final reading. Those in, Member Lear?
No, thank you.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
All right, action item 11.5. This one is also an amendment and continuation. I move that the board approve and continue with amendment R277-426, the definition of private and nonprofit schools for federal program services, on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Seeing no lights, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes unanimously.
Okay, action item 11.6, R277-123. This is an amendment. I move that the board approve R277-123, process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule as amended on second and final reading.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings,
Draft 3.
do we still need to say as amended if we're saying draft 3? So just draft 3. There's a
And I could
motion.
speak to that if there are any questions.
Okay, first let me, there's a motion on the floor that the board approves R277-123, process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule, draft 3 on second and final reading. Member Hanson? or sorry, Member Moss, would you like to speak to that motion first and then?
Briefly, yes. Since this is based, the rule is on the model policy that we approved. A couple of slight tweaks since that approval are that, if you recall, we approved in the model policy that the superintendent would make a determination up front whether the challenge to a local LEA's decision on a library materials issue, whether that challenge was contesting whether the LEA followed its own policy procedurally. And the superintendent was going to decide that. We had a suggestion from Deputy Superintendent Stallings and our AAG that board's legal counsel would make that initial determination to decide whether the appeal was appropriate. And from there, it would follow the procedure we talked about earlier and approved with respect to the model policy. So that's the one change that came since we last looked at this. And then a couple of other clarifying terms.
Time out. Since the committee met,
No, since the board reviewed and approved the model policy and since the committee met on the rule. So the language here came out of that model policy, which included the appeal. Then it went to committee on the rule and then to the full board on the rule.
I know, but so did the amendment come out of committee?
No, sorry, this amendment came after committee.
Oh, then it needs to be this, and then you need to make an amendment to amend what came out of committee.
Yes, sorry. I thought we sort of did that, but
That-
I didn't,
that
I don't
is-
think I stated it that way.
That
You're
is
right.
draft 3. So are you saying we
Correct.
need to do it separately? We need to
Draft 2
first
and then amend.
vote on the amendment first? So we need to make a motion to approve draft
Yeah.
2 and then make an amendment that it become draft 3.
Okay, sorry. Yep, you're
Okay.
right.
So,
So I move that on draft 2, correct, and then we'll amend for draft 3.
And then-
Yes.
And then you say, I want to make an amendment to
Yes,
that.
okay, I forgot, you can't just do it as amended. Gotcha. All right,
Otherwise, we have the impression
So-
that the committee brought this to us.
Yeah, I
Okay.
thought the committee brought this forward, and that's why it was.
sorry, okay. So I move that the board approve Rule 277-123, process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule, draft 2 on second and final reading.
okay, so, so now we need to have you give the amendment.
Yes,
So there's a motion on the
okay.
table to approve draft 2, and now go ahead and make the motion for
And
the
I'd like
amendment.
to propose an amendment, which is draft 3 in the backup, which is the changes that I just described regarding the AAG's review.
So there's a motion on the floor to change R277-123, draft 2 to draft 3 language. Speaking to the motion, you just did Member Moss. Can I move on
Yep,
to another?
that was
Member
it.
Hanson.
Okay, and we're speaking to draft 3 now, is that correct?
Correct.
And thank you for having that on the screen. I just have a couple of questions, and if you'll indulge me, there's more than a couple, it's gonna take a minute. But first, this process is for members of the public to report education-related violations of statute and board rule, is that right? I mean, should be limited to education-related violations?
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you come back up to the table, or AAG Quisenberry? Or both of you? Or, oh, sorry, Director Rasmussen.
And I'll preface this with, I know that we have a statute that we're working with, but when I read this, it seems to be wide open to any alleged violation of statute or board rule. So board rule would be education-related, statute could be anything. I wonder if we want to put in the title, education-related violations, and then throughout this, use that terminology so that we get things that are germane to our area of control, I guess.
So, does that need to be, without objection, board, can we qualify these to education-related statute complaints? Make that just a clerical change? Okay, looks like we have no objection on that. Also, this tweak, though, is specific to library policy complaints, not any educational complaint. This tweak we're talking about today is specific to library policy complaints. Sorry, library policy process complaints.
Okay, and if I'm,
Could I respond?
Yes.
I was just going to point out that this exceeds what we did in committee, so you understand that, right?
I might,
Okay,
I might
these are
be out of
broader-
order in talking about this now in the amendment, because we can make the amendment, and then we can come back and talk about this
The whole
in
entire rule?
context of, before we pass a draft 3. I don't know how to address that to make sure that my concerns get voiced.
The amendment is specific to legal counsel being the first reviewer, just changing the superintendent to the AAG to be the first reviewer to decide if those complaints will be brought to the board or not.
So if we
If they're
want to
valid or not.
restrict this discussion to that, then I'll defer, and we can pass that or not pass it, and then please come back to me.
Okay.
That's fine.
Member Moss, Chair Moss.
Just for clarity, and I caused lack of clarity by jumping to draft 3, but draft 2 includes in the rule all the underlined language, which was inserted into a broader rule of the process to report violations of statute or board rule. So that's not our language that came out of committee. Our language is underlined, and it deals only with this review of library review materials process. And then those changes that came since the committee are the minor underlined, highlighted in green and purple language. So I think the proposed amendment is broader than what the committee had brought or what the amendment is to what we brought out of committee. Not contesting the amendment, but that's not something we did on this round.
But the question on the agenda is not the whole entire rule. We're just inserting this process into an already existing rule.
Right.
Member Hanson? Yes.
The amendment
Correct.
is everything under.
So,
And after that, before we adopt the rule, there'll be a chance to look at it.
Well, the rules was adopted a long time ago, right? This is just a,
well,
So the amendments before the board, if I may, Chair, are to adopt this new Section 6 and some definitions related to Section 6. So draft 2 incorporates everything underlined except for the green and purple, which was added in draft 3. So if the board approves draft 3, you'd be adopting the changes with everything in Section 6 and the definitions related to that. If I may add one other thing, Chair?
so after we approve the amendments in purple and green, will members have an opportunity to talk about the rule as a whole if they want to make an additional amendment that didn't come out of committee or since committee?
okay, that's the
Member
best.
Moss? Chair Moss?
Sorry, I think there's an intermediate stage. We have draft 3 before us, which would accept the blue and purple. Then don't we vote on the entire amendment as it came out of committee? And then a third question, I think, raised by Chair Hansen is whether there's also an opportunity to address parts of the rule that were not affected by what we did in committee. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Well, some of it came out of committee. Two came out of committee.
Okay. I think we have 2 votes just to get what came out of committee, correct? The blue and purple stuff, and then the entire amendment as initially came out of committee. 2 votes there?
To be clear, we are talking about
Yes.
purple and green that did not come out of committee.
Right.
And then we will talk about section 6, which did come
Yes,
out of committee.
correct. And that's a separate third question of whether
Okay.
there are other amendments to the rule generally.
So if you have a question about purple and green, will you keep your lights on?
But I have a other clarifying question.
Is
When
it
do we-
about purple and green?
No. But it may be. I mean, I don't know when we
Okay,
talk-
let me start at the top then. Board Member Klein.
Okay, so I think mine has to do with the purple and green. So if I'm reading the rule correctly, or, there's reference to 53E dash 53E-3401, Section 8D, that says that a violation of board rule or statute that there has to be a procedure for parents to complain or bring attention to the board. It doesn't say to the superintendent or the board's legal counsel, but an individual may bring a violation of statute or state board to the attention of the state board in accordance with the process described in rule adopted by the state board. If the state board identifies a violation of state or state board rule as a result of the process described, the state board may take action in accordance with this section. So when this is saying it goes to superintendent or board legal counsel, but in statute it says that it's supposed to be brought to the attention of the board. And so I feel like there's a gatekeeping mechanism that's keeping it from coming to us. And plus the addition to the rule of the appeals process appears to be limiting parents' ability to bring forth violations of statute or board rule when it comes to HB 374.
So just if I understand correctly, when there is a concern like that, they do bring that through the audit hotline or go through internal audit. But in this case, it would not be a violation of board rule. It would be a violation of local LEA policy. And this is a different scenario than what you're referring to in quoting that
So
language.
as long as the rule 123
Stays the
still
same.
allows
Yes, it does.
parents to bring to the attention of the board violations that they are seeing in their school regarding HB 374, not just appealing the local education agency's process, but still they can bring violations to the board of the law, HB 374. Or are
Director
we
Rasmussen?
limiting them
Yes, Chair.
and violating our own rule and code in so doing?
What's being added in section 6 is a very limited procedure for appeals on LEA decisions on those sensitive materials. It's limited to that. The types of appeals that Board Member Kleiner is talking about could still be brought to the audit hotline, as you've said, or to the board through other means. But this section is a very limited
To
procedure.
process.
Okay,
Yes.
Only
so
to process.
follow up. So that's good to know. My question then is, if it goes through internal audit, when statute says it should be brought to the attention of the board, we don't often see what comes through to internal audit. So that, a lot of things may be reported that don't come to our attention, and yet, so that's what I'm saying, is the internal audit is kind of acting as a gatekeeper so that we don't always know what is being complained about.
My understanding would be all those complaints would go to the audit committee, who would screen that on behalf of the board and then determine how to proceed with those.
So the code says to the board, attention to the board. So is there a way that we can see any and all complaints that are coming into the internal audit so that we're aware of what's coming in instead of having to wait and see if something makes it?
The board would
All
have
the
the
way to
authority to
us.
determine what the procedures are as far as handling those complaints. So if the board wanted to change the procedure or allow a secondary procedure for a board member to request to see those, that would be within the board's authority to set that.
So, but for right now, do you have a comment on the purple and green?
Well, I guess that's in the section that
Which
we're
is-
referring to.
Yeah,
So
it's just replacing the superintendent with the AAG. Do you have a problem with replacing the superintendent with the AAG if a complaint comes through on process, LEA process of?
to be
following
perfectly honest,
policy.
I would have issue with either options there. So
Okay.
I don't know what the amendment would be other than to bring it to the board. So I would I would put forward an amendment to change it to the board instead of superintendent or board's legal counsel.
Okay, so there's amendment on the table to change the reviewer of the initial complaints to the full board rather than the proposed AAG in the amendment. Do we have a second? We do not. Vice Chair Belknap? Did you have a? No, you're up.
Yeah,
I just,
okay.
point of order, I guess in exchanging that out, can you do that when it's the whole thing? Do you know what I mean? Is it an acceptable amendment to exchange out the whole thing? Does that make sense?
Well, I think to my knowledge, all of the purple and green have to do with
It'd be a
changing the
substitute
AG,
motion, wouldn't it?
the AG for the superintendent. Vice Chair Belknap?
Okay, I just have 4 concerns with switching this. One is the amount of time this could take for our AAGs. Number 2, they have other duties that, other than checking over library policies. Number 3, this could equal a large amount of work if there's a lot of complaints that come up for our AAGs. And the amount of money that we pay for time for our AAGs to work it's also another piece. So I have concerns with switching this.
Okay, can we hear from our AAG, please, about feasibility?
Angie's going to go first, and I'll back cleanup if necessary.
Okay.
Thank you. So there was a group of us, including our AAGs, Deputy Jones, I think Deputy Norman and I, and our AAGs. Once this passed committee, as you know, it's going to require staff resources and knowledge. A lot of these issues are going to be about procedure and whether legal procedures, due process, et cetera, are followed. And so it's going to require legal support. And so one thing we were thinking about is who's going to be the best to staff this. And one option we thought was our legal counsel because they have the expertise. And we could use carry forward funds or one-time funds to pay for additional support staff from the AG's office if this became a larger issue and we had a lot of appeals. Whereas the existing staff, so had this happened at the legislative level, for example, so let's look at Representative Waldrop's bill, which had an appeals process in it. We fiscal noted it. We asked for resources for staff to support that. And obviously, you're not the legislature, and we're not talking about money right now. But one of the practical ways of staffing this new appeals process, if we were to get a number of them, was with our legal counsel, they have a full team. They have the whole AG's office, that if we needed to contract for additional hours, and let's say that Brian and Ashley, their hours were full, then they could ask one of their colleagues who are also an extension of your legal counsel, we could pay for their hourly services to do these reviews and support the board in this process. And so I wanted to just help or kind of share with you our thinking. I think to be blunt, a specialist who's not an attorney will not on their own be able to handle these appeals. And so there will need to be legal support. And since this is the board's appeals process, you all are going to be making this determination, and our legal counsel is your legal counsel ultimately who will be supporting you as you make these decisions. That was kind of the reasoning or the thought process that we went through, but it definitely included our AGs. So it wasn't that, Superintendent or Angie or Scott just said, we're not doing this. We figured this was the best way to handle an unknown. Because it could be we get 1 or 2 of these a year, which probably won't be as burdensome or time intensive, or we could get 40 of them. And that's where we thought we could contract with the AG's office to fill that capacity if needed.
Thank you. AG Quisenberry?
And just to add to that, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones indicates that I think his words were money is not an issue, and so Ashley and I will be staffing this from Hawaii and field all complaints that you might have. There's a Hilton out there, I understand, is very accessible. If we get overloaded, if we're just inundated, we will cry mercy and let you know, and we can kind of
Come
go
up with
from
a plan
there,
B.
let you know. Otherwise, we're happy to take whatever comes, and we'll just kind of play it by ear, I sense.
Thank you. Chair, I'm gonna skip up to Chair Moss since this is his, and then continue on the list of speakers.
I'll be brief. I'll just say that this was initiated from staff and the AAG rather than from the committee, so it seemed to make sense to me. One thing to keep in mind is all they need to do is determine whether the request presents an allegation that the LEA violated the procedure outlined in the LEA's library materials policy. They don't need to decide whether it alleges a valid violation. They don't need to adjudicate anything. They just need to look at it and say, is that what you're alleging, or are you alleging something else? And if it's something else, then it doesn't go into the system. So hopefully that review.
And if they
with
are
the
alleging a
appropriate
policy
expertise,
violation, it will come to the board.
it just goes to leadership to decide where to
Yeah.
put it, correct? So
Okay.
we're hoping it doesn't burden them, but I appreciated the suggestion from them that they thought, look, given the technical nature, although it's a very narrow question, something they should be able to take a look at. So I favor the change.
Thank you. Member Lear?
I have two questions. One is to just Member Chair Moss's point right now, that if that's the case, I'm also concerned about something about the green where it says violated the procedure outlined. It's more than the procedure, violated the LEA's policy. Is that a distinction without a difference, or is that an important?
Both.
Right, but it's not just the procedure within the policy, it's violated the LEA's policy in any way. Or did we, I recall it being, I don't want to broaden this. I was the last person who wanted to broaden this, but I also want to be fair to the language that came out in the policy.
Chair Moss, do you have a response?
The initial intent, as I understood it, and we all discussed, and had a lot of discussion at the model policy level, was that it would be a question of procedural compliance rather than deciding if you made the right choice.
No, yeah.
And so this is limiting language. That's what I understood the initial intent to be, was that if you follow the procedures of your policy, we're not going to second guess the substance of your decision.
Right, and it just seems to me that there's distance between the procedures of your policy and the substance. And I don't,
Right.
I can live with this. I just want to be fair to the agreement that we all made. That was my second point. If you're telling me that this is okay, then I'm okay. My second point is at what point do we address the underlining from the committee that's not
Next.
green and purple?
Next.
Okay, good.
There's a motion on the table to substitute the purple language for the green language in R277-123. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Now we will go back to the motion that talks about the section. Is that correct, Director Rasmussen? And so would that be then a motion that simply states draft 3 as amended? Or just draft three?
Draft 3 includes the amendments.
Okay. So are you okay, Chair Moss, if I read a statement and you just say you're so moved? So the motion language would be that the board approves R277-123 process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule draft 3 on second and final reading. Do we have a motion?
That's the motion, so moved.
Thank you. Member Hanson. Oh, sorry, Member Lear.
Okay, then I have a question, and Jeff's actually trying to send me the language from the model policy. I think the definition, as it was added, of a person with standing is too narrow, because for purposes of this appeal, it should have included also a person on the other side of the discussion, not only a person who originally brought the complaint.
Are you making an amendment, or are you thinking about it for a minute?
I was asking, and Jeff was going to get us the exact language. But
Okay,
think
shall I come back to you after Member
the
Hanson?
purpose of standing, I think, yes, that's
Okay,
fine.
okay,
I just want to make
member-
sure it's not left, so the person of standing is only on one side of the issue.
Okay, Member Hanson?
Okay, I have a motion to amend draft 3 to include the words education-related, so education-related, wherever it says violations throughout the rule.
I
that would
think we
be
agreed as a board with
in
no
the title.
objection to add that as a clerical fix.
Okay, I thought that discussion was all pushed aside
Yeah,
because. we're
no,
back on the
we
amendment.
did it.
Okay, okay. Then I have a couple of questions for the committee. Line 36. This is the definition of what needs to be included in a hotline report.
Can you speak pretty closely into
I'm
your
sorry, I'll
microphone
try
for
to
the
try to
public?
do that. Can we get the rule up, please? 36.
36.
The question before making a motion. So 3A says as part of the hotline report, an individual may provide, but there are no musts. There are no requirements for what needs to be included in a hotline report. I wondered if that was intentional or if we shouldn't at least have numbers 1 and 2, maybe even 3 in that. I mean, this allows for a very vague hotline report. Or it says may, and then everything's listed below, which means none of those need to be included for us to
Chair.
recognize it as a report.
Please, Director Rasmussen?
So I don't think anybody from internal audit is with us in the room just right now. This wasn't part of the amendment, so this wasn't part of the discussion. So I don't know if we have anybody that can really answer what the intention was when the rule was initially, or this part was initially passed.
This is pre-existing language from the
Yes.
former rule.
Yes.
And I understand that. And I'm sorry, we have the rule in front of us though, and so
So, Member Hanson, I'm just trying to understand. When I read it, I feel like it says a parent or member of the public may submit any of those things, but may not have all of those things. Are you not okay with that?
that's not the way that I read it. It doesn't say that anything has to be included, not even the person's name for who's making the report, so.
They don't have to.
we'll
They can
accept
report anonymously.
Anonymous reports with vague information,
We do.
and those are recognized as valid reports? Is that what we want to do? I understand current practice under this rule. Is that what we want to do?
Are you making a motion?
I'll
Or you
make-
just want to have a little conversation?
No, I wondered, before I
No,
make a
no, I
motion, I don't
mean,
want to
I'm-
change something that someone's thought through and decided that this
Sure.
is the best way to do it, but
Someone did just long before we were here. Yeah, Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
This is more intense.
Debbie, I was just going to say, we would like, there we
Oh,
go.
well, hello, CAE Davis. Welcome.
thank you.
Member Hanson has a question about this section.
Yes.
And he would like to know where it says the complaint may include. Is there a reason that it says may include? So we could get an anonymous, vague complaint? And was that done intentionally?
Yes, so, and pardon my voice, it's in and out a little bit. So Debbie Davis, Chief Audit Executive for the board. It was intentional that we use may, just so that anybody can provide any allegation, and that's what it is when it comes to us. We do have a process built in where we will follow up and ask additional questions. And if we do not receive sufficient information, we close those hotlines for insufficient data. So we do have that process. We recognize that sometimes we're not going to get sufficient information, but we did intentionally say may. Just that there's a spectrum when we receive hotlines of the information that we get. But we did intentionally use may in the rule.
Thank you. Okay, I won't make a motion on that. Moving to 72, the same question about the word may, and this is our staff who receive a resubmitted alleged violation. So this is one that's been processed, turned back to an LEA or someone for work, and then comes back to us again. And I didn't see any requirements on what staff needed to do with regard to that, because that one is also a may request or may conduct a preliminary investigation, or I assume may do nothing. Is that correct?
Is it okay if I jump in and?
Please do.
And respond on that? It is a may again. Hotlines are very case specific. We will never just drop anything. We track everything. We added additional tracking to our database so that we could track resubmitted complaints. I can tell you since this rule was passed, we've maybe only had 1 or 2 actual resubmitted complaints. It really just depends on who has jurisdictional authority. The majority of concerns that we receive are not within the jurisdictional authority of the State Board of Education, so we're very limited on what we can do. But we will always try and do the extent of what we can, but we leave it pretty wide, just because, again, it's just case-based
gatekeep.
when we receive hotlines.
So at a minimum, we wouldn't want to check back with the LEA or hear the other side of the complaint as a must? Yes, I
we
would
could
see,
add that. I don't, yeah.
I would see that as something that we want staff to do to show that they followed up on a resubmitted complaint. So I'll make a motion that we change the wording on line 72 to read, staff who received a resubmitted alleged violation described in subsection 1 must request information from the LEA, state agency, or other entity, and may conduct a preliminary investigation of the issue.
Point of order.
Yes.
Could I move the previous question on the material that came out of committee without any adverse effect on whatever else might be moved? These amendments are not amendments to what we proposed out of committee. Would it be appropriate to make a motion to call the previous question on the original amendment out of committee, which has now been amended with purple and green?
No, because I've got a question on, well, you can do it, but.
That would invite questioning as to
Yeah.
that motion, and then
And-
leave for other amendments that might be related to the rule that did not come out of committee.
The motion
Trying to
on the
focus on that part.
floor has the whole rule open, and so currently he's amending the rule. The motion wasn't specific to only the section. It was draft 3, which contained the whole rule. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, does draft 3 then necessarily invite amendments that weren't brought up in committee?
Draft 3 is on the table right now.
Which is, I think draft 3 is just the changes to the rule.
Yes, it
Is it not?
Point of order.
It includes draft,
Necessarily includes the whole rule? Okay, if that's.
yeah. It includes the whole draft. It
I
includes the whole rule
understand,
plus the
But this
amendment.
is not the committee's work. Has nothing to do with the committee's work. Okay, fair enough. I wanted to get
Yeah.
done the committee's work and whether we approve it without
Yeah.
adverse effect on other questions, but
If
okay.
I might
if that's
just
the-
mention also, draft 3 didn't come out of committee. What was brought to the board as draft
It was
3 did not
within
come out of
the
committee.
committee's work, an amendment to the committee's work, but okay. Point of order's been clarified.
Draft
Go
2
ahead.
is
I'll-
incorporated now into draft 3, so
Okay.
that came out of committee. We're all going to split hairs. Okay, we have a motion on the floor to change the word may to the word must in line
Will, right? Or shall?
shall.
Will, that's fine, shall,
What do you put
Like
there?
72,
word you like.
Shall may?
72, 3, and 4.
Yes. Angie, I'll call in on Angie, and I'm not sure.
Vice Chair Davis.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
One point of one point that you may want to consider that was brought to my attention is if you require internal audit to contact the LEA, there may be instances where it's something that you don't actually want to contact the LEA. You may be
Exactly.
local authority, it might be that it was an issue of, say, sexual abuse against a student, so you need to contact DC, a different authority. So by leaving it as may, you give discretion based on the facts. If you do shall, it could require staff to contact the LEA, and that might not be
And just a quick
appropriate.
question too, and then I'll go back to Member Hanson. If it's a resubmission, every time there's a situation where we need information from the LEA, audit is contacting the LEA, correct? If you feel that there is additional information needed, if we put this language in and they've provided all the information we need, do we still have to contact the LEA if we change this language?
Is it okay if I address
Yes,
that?
please.
So generally, the process is when we receive a concern from a complainant from an individual, we will review it. We will see if there's additional information that we need from that individual. Then we assess and look at who has jurisdictional authority, where should this go, who can resolve the matter, and we'll refer to that entity. So we might refer to the LEA. That doesn't mean we're asking the LEA to provide us with information. We're sending it to them for them to resolve. Or we might send it back to the individual that complained, or we might send it to DCFS or any of
Special
those.
education
So if
or-
somebody resolves it, ideally, we referred it, it went to the LEA, they looked at it, it was not resolved satisfactorily for the complainant, and so they can come back to internal audit and say, we don't like how this was resolved, will you take another look? And that's when we can say, okay, let's see, what do we need to get? we could contact the LEA at that point and say, hey, LEA, what did you do? What happened? That's the may. We may do it. Or if we need to go a different direction, we could do that as well. So again, case specific, but all good points, all fair points. It just really depends on what the hotline concern is.
Member Hanson?
Yeah, if I could just follow up. So there's no feedback on the initial referrals that are made to the LEA, right? We send it out, but we don't get a report from them that say this was resolved in a certain way or anything like that. There's no feedback loop on those referrals. Is that correct?
There is no required feedback loop. On occasion, we do have LEAs that respond back and let us know what they did, but it
Okay,
is
but
not required.
On occasion. So we don't
Yes.
know how complaints were resolved unless we
Right.
get a referral back that says,
Right.
hey, this wasn't done correctly.
Yes.
So all I'm asking is that if that comes back, that we would check with the agency, and the language is LEA, state agency, or other entity, that we would go back to them and say, what happened on this, so that we can address the issue. I think that's common courtesy if it comes back from a complainant that there hasn't been resolved correctly, that we should check and see what was done on this side to resolve it, so that we can balance that out and see if other action is required. So I don't think it's an unreasonable ask. I don't think it's a difficult ask. I think it's probably what we would do anyway, but I think that we should take that step at least if something comes in.
Just a point of clarification, Member Hanson. Are you asking for the amendment so that we can go back and follow up again with the complainant and say, we understand this agency resolved your issue this way, and we're telling you again, this is how they resolved it in case they didn't tell you? Because if we don't have jurisdiction, like she said, if an LEA has jurisdiction or a DCFS has jurisdiction and we don't have jurisdiction, there's nothing we would do to resolve the issue. It would just simply be a communication piece.
Understood.
Is that what you're saying?
We would be informed and would have
Okay.
given them the courtesy of finding out
Okay.
what happened.
In case the agency doesn't contact them.
Yes,
Okay.
that could have happened as well.
Member Lear, no, Member Earl.
I'm speaking against the amendment. I'm not for it. I think our staff does a good job of balancing out where that needs to go, so. that's it.
Member Lear.
I do have a point, but it's not to Scott's amendment. So do I stay in the queue or
Okay,
just?
you can stay in the queue.
Okay.
Seeing no other lights on, we have an amendment on the floor to change the word may to the word shall in line. Member Hanson, help me.
So shall A, request information from the state, and may conduct a preliminary investigation. So there'd be a shall and then and may.
Okay, there's an amendment on the floor to adjust R277-123. Lines 72, from a may to a shall, and lines 73. And line 74 to include may at the beginning. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay, let's take a roll call vote. Actually, let's just do it. Let's have the yeses raise your hands, please. 6 yeses. I can be a yes on that too, and that motion fails. We have a motion on the floor. Oh, did you have another amendment?
I do.
Okay.
Line 86, and this may be one we can do just as an editorial. It reads board review of LEA appeals on library materials. I believe that the meaning we're trying to present is board review of appeals of LEA library material decisions. That, if we have that language up, it's line 86. Line 86. So the way that's written, it looks like the LEA is the appealing body. I think board review of appeals of LEA library material decisions. That,
I think that's a clerical fix we could make. Is there objection by the board?
Board review of appeals of LEA library materials decisions.
So it doesn't look like the LEA is the appealing body.
Yeah, it's written that way down below.
Staff, are we okay with that? With no objection from the board?
I'll move quickly. 99, I have a concern about the board being able to process things within 60 days because this has to go through executive committee to be assigned to a committee and then go to the board, which could easily take, depending on when it comes in to the board, more than 60 days. I think 90 days would be more appropriate, but we may have already looked at that. I don't know.
Director Rasmussen?
Staff, as we discussed this, felt this would allow it to go through the committee board process, and that normally takes 2 months. And so that would be after the board legal counsel has reviewed it and then referred it to the executive committee or the executive committee to put on the board agenda. So that would be within the normal timeframe for review of board items.
Also, I'll add that we have a 60-day on the LEA level, and that came from the chair of the Administrative Rules Committee, who was actually expressed a concern that these could be used as idea banning situations rather than for what was stated in 374. And so he said if you do longer than 68 days on any level, it could turn into just wanting to pull books off of shelves instead of
So
going through a
I'm-
process.
Yeah, I'm certainly mindful of trying to get it done quickly, but I don't think a local LEA has to go through the committee process. So if the executive committee gets this, if it comes in the day after the executive committee decides things, it sits unless the executive committee pulls a special meeting, then it would sit, and then it would get assigned into the next committee meeting unless there's a special meeting, which could be 30 days, and then it could be 30 days to the board meeting unless it's September, and then it could be 45 days or 40 days to the next one. So I just think we're cutting it really tight. at
Is
60
it
days
specific to a
potentially.
committee? To one of our
It says any
committees?
committee in here, recommendation to, the board refers it, or it's referred to a standing committee.
So who's referring it to the standing committee? Is the executive referring it to the standing committee, or could the board chair refer it straight to a committee based on this language?
I don't know.
The rule refers to board leadership. Legal counsel would refer to board leadership to make that determination as they see fit.
Do you think that would change your timeline concern
No, and
at all?
I'm fine if the board wants to live to 60 days. I just don't want a technical violation to be a big problem for us.
Yeah.
And it looks like it could be really tight timing,
Sure.
depending on when, we can't control when these come in.
Member Moss, or Chair Moss?
I was just going to say in committee, we had the same question, and we dug pretty deeply with staff on that, and how long, how short, what are the advantages to both? I think leadership and staff both felt this was doable, but I think it was a legitimate question. It was tough back and forth, and that's where they came down with their recommendation about, balancing both sides of that equation, speed with not falling into a technical violation. So
We may need to
we
adjust
felt
the
reassured by
rule
their
at
responses
some
on
point.
that one.
Thank you, Chair, Member Lear.
No, nothing to this. I'm sorry.
Okay, Member Hanson?
Okay, if staff says not necessary, I won't make a motion there.
Okay.
I have just one more. Line 106, I would move that we add the words appeal to the LEA. Board shall return the appeal to the LEA with an order stating, because we refer to an order that's going to be issued under 5A, and line 106 needs to reference that order to kind of tie that up.
Without objection from the board, are you okay if we re-reference the order that's mentioned above in line 106 for clarity purposes?
Can you say that?
So I'm sorry, 112 references an order that's going to
No,
be
what, you're gonna put on
done.
106.
So on 106, just the appeal to the LEA with an order stating,
The one that's referred to in
With an
112.
order stating.
yeah.
Yeah, they need to align.
Okay, with no objection from the board, staff, can we add that in for clarity? Thank you. Anything else, Member Hanson?
That's all, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that the board approves R277123 process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule draft 3 on second and final reading. Do I need to say as amended, or is draft 3 sufficient? As amended, those in favor say,
Yeah, remember that I had one more. I had a different amendment.
Member Lear.
I won't feel judged.
I'm just kidding.
I have an amendment on line 20.
Okay.
It is the definition of an individual with standing. And I wanted to be true to not necessarily to the model policy, but to the idea from the model policy that a person with standing should be able to come from either perspective. So the amendment I am proposing would read, beginning on line 20, an individual with standing under, so we don't pollute the whole rule, but an individual with standing under R277-123-6 means I'll just read it and then I
Okay.
think they have the language. A parent of a student who attends the school, a student who attends the school, or an employee of the school.
Point of order.
Okay.
Not all districts some districts are allowing community members, so it's going to have to be in compliance with whatever the district policy is. So you can't, in limiting it,
This is
you're either going to have to expand it out or leave it for whoever.
except this is the board's rule. So the board can state who will accept as a person of standing. I don't think we can adjust our rule to meet, and this is pretty broad, meet everything that might come up with.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table to,
You can amend my amendment if you think.
there's a motion on the table as written. I'm going to get one in just a minute. To add the word, to add D, an employee of the LEA, to section 3. To section, okay.
And it needs
Okay.
to,
There's a motion on the table in R277-123 to add in section C, a student enrolled in the LEA, and in section D, an employee of the LEA. Do we have a
My-
second?
well, first let me make sure that's not really my motion. I wanted to not necessarily affect the whole rule, but only affect the section having to do with library materials. So I think it needs to be under 123-6, which is now added. Thanks.
In 123-6. That's the motion on the table. That's where it will be added. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Member Straight, second.
I think what it does to be did, a parent who did not serve on an LEA review committee,
Okay.
because it's a past tense.
Member Earl?
Still, it speaks to that same point. We don't know what's going to be coming out of our districts. I know that some have on there that it can be a community member. So we'd have to add another thing, or I'm not sure we need that if we have, if you have A, it allows for anybody that's submitting a request for review of library materials, which then would leave it open for whatever the policy is of the district. We don't have to clarify each one of those, unless I'm missing something.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
Just as Board Member Earl stated, I think that if an LEA broadens that, it would be covered under A. So if they submitted the complaint, they would have standing under A.
So I don't understand the point of the,
Okay, so we've got all these comments, and everybody's heard the comments, and we have no more lights on except for Member Earl's. Lears, do you still have a comment?
I just want to make sure it allows for a person who didn't submit a complaint for review. It could be a person who objected to the submission of the complaint. That's my point.
Thank you. Member Hanson?
Same point. I just wondered if other people who are interested, which, we've listed them, a student or an employee, who weren't the submitters of it and are not a parent, then if we're ruling them out, and if that's
We are
what we want.
intentionally ruling them out, which was the point of the model
Adding them
policy. If
in.
you think it should be broader, then I'm okay with that. I thought we wanted to keep it not let anybody on God's green earth submit an appeal to the board.
Member Moss?
I think as phrased, this makes sense. We have a very narrow channel of types of review of
Talents.
grounds for appeal. And so I think it makes sense if somebody's on the losing side of the appeal, they didn't request it, but they don't agree with the decision that was made. If they fall within that narrow channel of challenging whether they follow their procedure, it makes sense to bring them into that, again, narrow channel. It's a bit of a broadening of the scope of people who can participate, but with careful guardrails. So I support
Thank
the
you.
amendment.
Seeing no other discussion, there is a motion on the floor to add to R277-123, Section 6, Line C, a student enrolled in the LEA, and D, an employee of the LEA. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Thank you. We have a motion on the floor that the board approves R277-123, process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule, draft 3 on second and final reading as amended. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that passes with Board Member Klein opposed. And Board Member Lear, you did let us know very early on that you wanted to make that amendment, so thank you for that. Chair Moss.
All right, action item 11.8, regarding request for data and information. Move that the board repurposes the $300,000 of discretionary funds for the anti-bullying FTE to be used for contracted services.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves a third-party review of the data and conclusions of the USIMAC study.
Oh.
Is that the one you just did?
Nope.
Wait, did I
Sorry.
skip one? We skipped that one. There's a motion on the floor that the board, are you on the repurposing of the 300,000?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I haven't, one
Sorry.
inserted in mine. That the board approves repurposing of the 300,000 of discretionary funds for the anti-bullying FTE to be used for contracted services. Member Moss, would you like to speak to that?
No, sorry.
Member Earl?
Yeah, speak to it, please. What I mean is so we're contracting out with someone to do this? I'm
Correct, and I think I may have to refer to Deputy Jones to explain the details, but this came out of an approval of discretionary funds for anti-bullying in-house, and then determination to go outside instead.
Ma'am,
Please.
Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones, Board Member Moss is correct. As you know, it's difficult to recruit right now. And Dr. Voorhees can speak to this, but essentially we tried to recruit for the position as you had originally approved. We can't find anyone that's qualified to do that, so we're looking at your approval to offer contracted services to continue to do great things with anti-bullying.
Thank you. Member Hanson?
Yeah, I am. I don't know what that means. That
Well,
makes
I'm
me-
sorry, did I not answer the question?
You answered the question well. I'm just
Oh.
not sure what that means.
Just
We're
means pay
finding
on
someone that
contract
fits.
instead of full-time.
Yeah, rather than hiring an FTE using that money, we would like to hire a firm, or, I mean, we'd have to do the RFP process, so it might be an individual firm or, whoever qualifies to do that, rather than trying to find a
And they
half-time
would
FTE.
address the bullying issue.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they would provide the support that's necessary to continue, because if you recall, this stemmed from that anti-bullying
Yeah,
training study session that you had.
that's why I'm asking questions.
Yes, ma'am. And so
Okay.
we asked you, Chair, we asked for money to hire a half-time FTE to absorb some of the other work and efforts going on in student support so that we could get a half-time FTE there. The recruitment, recruiting is difficult right now. It just is. So we feel strongly that we can still get to where we need to get with anti-bullying if we are allowed to use this funding to go out on an RFP basis. Try to find a qualified firm to help us.
Thank you. Member Hanson?
Yeah, and maybe just a clarification on that. So the FTE, or excuse me, the contracted services would be to provide anti-bullying services, not to do other work so that frees up someone to do anti-bullying, or that's my question. I think maybe that's what Jenny was getting at too.
Director Albernos?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Tanya Albernos, Coordinator for Prevention and Student Services. The request is actually for $300,000 to offload the truancy, absenteeism, and school dropout work so that we can free up our specialists to do more on the anti-bullying initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves repurposing the $300,000 of discretionary funds for the anti-bullying FTE to be used for contracted services as stated by Director Albornoz. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Member Klein is a no. That passes. Yes. Do you need those repeated? Do you need those repeated? The question, or the request was that the 3 items that Director Albornoz said be listed in the motion, that those contracted services will be working on those 3 things. Can you add that, please? Thank you. We skipped one, I think, Chair Moss. Did we skip?
Skip USIMAC?
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Action item, wait, did we get that one checked off?
Yes.
We finished the last one? Okay. Sorry about that. Action item 11.7. Having a little bit of slowness here. Excuse me. I move that the board approves a third-party review of the data and conclusions of the Utah State Instructional Materials Access Center USIMAC study.
There's a motion on the floor that the board approves a third-party review of the data and conclusions of the USIMAC study. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Chair Moss.
All right, last item, number 9, 11.9, on UTA EcoPass funding. Move that the board approves paying 85% of the cost of an EcoPass for an individual employee of USBE.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. As stated, that the board approves paying 85% of the cost of an EcoPass for an individual employee of USBE. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Oh, no, it wasn't. Okay, Member Hart.
I just want to make the point and point out to the board that it wasn't, we actually got into the meeting and we upped the amount. So if you read the proposal, we did increase that. So if, from
50. 75? Oh, was it? It was 50, then 75, then 85.
75 to 85%, just to inflation and stuff. So if you read the first, just know that it went up to 85. I wanted you to know that before you voted.
Thank you for that. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Chair Lear, no pressure. We're an hour behind and we have a hard stop because several board members are attending a board-sponsored function event, so, okay.
I can do that in under 20 seconds.
No pressure.
Yes.
Item 11.2, data sharing agreement, Salt Lake County Health Department. Moves the board approve the amended data sharing agreement extension. You need your mic on. Salt Lake.
Microphone.
Okay, this didn't start off well. Okay, item 11.2, the committee moves that the board approve the amended data sharing agreement extension through December 2023 with the Salt Lake County Health Department.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor as stated. Member Earl?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand why I listened to the committee hearing, but I just don't understand why we're having to extend this beyond this December with just with what's going on. I just think we're extending something that doesn't need to happen. Anyways, that's.
And do you want somebody to answer that for you, or do you want to just not understand?
Or object.
No offense.
Board Member Lear, I'll address the chair. I do understand, and I understand why I'm voting no. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves the data sharing agreement extension through December 2023 with the Salt Lake County Health Department. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Members Belknap, Klein, and Earl opposed.
Item 11.3, data sharing agreement with Utah Head Start Association. The committee moves that the board approve the agreement with Utah Head Start Association.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. That passes with Board Member Klein and Board Member Earl opposed.
Item 11.4, R277-474, school instruction and sex education, a continuation only. The committee moves that the board continue R277-474, school instruction and sex education on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Item
That passes
11.5.
unanimously.
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Item 11.5, R277-324, paraprofessional/paraeducator programs, assignments, and qualifications. This is an amendment. The committee moves that the board approve R277-324, professional/paraeducator programs, assignments, and qualifications, draft one on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously.
Item 11.6, additional assessments to determine the highly qualified status of paraprofessionals working in Title I schools.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say.
Not quite, that's just the item. The committee moves that the board approves the recommended assessments and respective cut scores for LEAs to use to determine the highly qualified status of paraprofessionals working in Title I schools.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes with Board Member Belknap and Klein opposed.
Item 11.7, R277-522, entry years enhancements, I, for quality teaching level 1 Utah teachers, a continuation only. The committee moves that the board continue R277-522, entry years enhancements, I, for quality teaching level 1 Utah teachers on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Board Member Earl?
Not on it, sorry. I'm behind one here.
Okay. Board Member Vice Chair Belknap?
Thanks. I have a question on why we're calling this level 1 Utah teachers. Because we don't have level 1s and 2s anymore.
Good point. That didn't even occur to us
Do
to
we have
ask.
someone from licensing here?
Everybody's looking out the door.
So there should probably be something
Deputy,
different.
Director Thronson?
Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Malia's out sick today, so normally she would be here for this question. Level 1, it just needs to be removed. I think it's a part, when we look at the rules, we forget to look at the titles sometimes, so this would be a technical change we could make.
So technical change without objection from the board would be to remove the words level 1.
All right. And as I recall, they're not substantive parts of the rule anyway.
Correct.
The titles.
Correct.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. Board Member Hutchings,
Permission to ask a question?
please.
I thought I remembered that UIE went away with the new licensing structure. Is that not the case? It still exists?
We still have the support structure for new teachers. So we also have this one's continuing. There's a piece of it that needs to continue, and we have a rule that's newer that represents the current practice, but they have to be in place for some of our APT, ARL teachers that we're still getting through the old process. So we actually have two rules in this vein, which leads to why you're like, I thought we got rid of this.
Okay, thank you. Member Klein?
Well, I have a note from our committee meeting on it saying that basically we're asking to pass it now, but it will be repealed after the sunset date, June 30th of 2023. So it will go away soon.
That is correct.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor that the board continues R277-522, entry years enhancements EYE for quality teaching Utah teachers on second and final reading. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Member Klein, opposed? Member Klein?
Let's see. Okay, item 11.8, R277-728, which is the new rule, honors courses. The committee moves that the board approve R277-728 honors courses, draft 3, on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Member Hymas?
Yes, thank you. I do speak against the motion, but I do want to also make an amendment on line 27 in case it does go through. And I'd love for line 27 to get pulled up. I apologize to the committee and to the board that this wasn't caught during committee meeting. Line 27 states, we amended this to read, utilize only direct instruction. And direct instruction is a method of teaching, not necessarily directly speaking to kids. And so I think that needs to be amended, and maybe it goes back to emphasize teacher lecture. But I think those who are familiar with direct instruction know that this would not be good to put in the rule.
We
I'm
missed
sorry, I didn't catch
We missed a
that.
code word. What
I
were
think
we
it was
thinking?
there intentionally.
Us, of all people.
It's there intentionally. Okay, that was there intentionally so that a teacher would not only utilize the strategy of direct instruction. But there's an amendment on the floor to, how do you want to change it?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I know that direct instruction is a model that teachers use. It's not necessarily lecture, it's a form of teaching. And so to say that it cannot be in an honors course,
It cannot only be the only strategy used. So the teacher can't stand and speak to the students 100% of the time. There's got to be some other strategies
Right.
used.
right,
Some
and I guess
engagement.
as we have this debate
Yeah.
here, that wouldn't be direct instruction. We're looking at it at two different lenses is what I'm thinking. I don't know if. I know, direct instruction, I'm thinking of Zig Engelman's direct instruction. Yeah.
You actually do want to.
So
Exactly.
teacher lecture and direct instruction are very similar things. I mean, they're teacher-directed instruction. They're not like collaborative learning types of strategies, things like that. And so prior
argue
to the
that.
change, it said,
Teacher lecture.
emphasize, it may not emphasize teacher lecture, but to give more flexibility for those who really do love to lecture, we softened it a bit and wrote, they may not only utilize direct instruction. It could say, they may not only use teacher lecture. It could say either one.
Are they synonyms?
They
Can
could
I-
be interchangeable.
Can I
but
respond to that?
Yes, Member
The reason I
Hymas?
say that direct instruction, if we go back to what the founder of direct instruction taught, was not lecture-based at all. It was actually very interactive, very back and forth teaching. It wasn't a listen to what I'm saying or I am directly instructing you. That's where I think the miscommunication is.
But it is teacher-led. It is teacher.
So we want this?
You want that back. And you
That's
want
what
to
I'm
say
saying.
emphasize only teacher.
Right, and so, yeah, my
So what's your amendment?
recommendation would be to go back to keeping in the words emphasize teacher lecture. And I want to keep that in there because it says an honors course may not emphasize teacher lecture. I'd rather keep that in there than put in utilize only direct instruction.
Okay, so there's amendment on the floor in line
27.
line A of R277-728 to take out the amended language and to go back to the language emphasize teacher lecture. I have a lot of lights on. Really, it's the exact same thing almost in my mind, but if I'm fine with this motion, are your lights on for this motion?
I didn't get a second. I'm sorry, I don't believe I got a second. I just spoke to the whole thing.
Member
but-
Cannon is going to second, and no other lights are on for this motion unless you raise your hand right now. Those in favor of this, Member Cannon.
So I had the same question that Matt brought up. I am familiar with direct instruction. It's something that's used, my experience is it's used in the lower grades, and it's very structured, and I just couldn't imagine what it was doing in this honors class. So I appreciate your picking that up, and I'm in favor of your amendment.
Well, he's saying he wants direct, it doesn't matter. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, Member Earl.
I would like to make a substitute motion that, that we replace Rule R277728 with our direct staff. In place of a rule, we direct staff to create guidance and best practices around honors courses.
That's what this rule is.
Second.
Is there a
I
second?
don't want a rule, that's what I'm saying.
Second.
Second, oh, I see what you're saying.
Place of a rule.
I see what you're saying. Member Hymas, second. There's a substitute motion on the floor that the board, in place of R277-728, that the board direct staff to create guidance on honors courses
And best practice.
and best guidance and best practices in place of having a rule. Did we get a second on that?
Yeah, Matt.
Matt, Member Hymas. Member Earl, do you want to talk up to your motion?
Yeah, I think most of this is guidance anyways. I feel like we're reaching into districts on what they should be doing. And if they're doing it poorly, that's something that their boards need to be addressing. I think we can give guidance. I don't think when we start doing rules, then we have to enforce them, then we have to monitor them. Then we have all these other things that play out when we establish a rule. I really feel like that districts need to be accountable for this, and that it needs to go back to those governing boards to do this if it's not being done well. And I think our staff have the knowledge to share and to help inform. But I'm not for a rule around this. This is not our area.
Okay, thank you. I just want to double check. I'm trying to remember in our meeting, but the LEAs were supportive of this rule, correct?
May I respond?
Yes.
Yes, so this came from the LEAs. It came from the math directors, and then we went to every content area that has honors courses and asked, does this need to change? We had 60% say, give us a rule, or actual statute around this. About 13% said, just get rid of honors. Or maybe that was the 28%, because it doesn't mean anything in a lot of communities. And then that 13% was like, it's fine, leave it alone. 28% was like, just get rid of honors. We didn't go that route as parents, I don't think would be supportive of that direction. And I think there's opportunities to improve honors so that it does serve its purpose. And so we worked with hundreds of educators as well as the superintendents. They actually vetted the rule and are supportive of the rule as is, and wanted it to be able to give some teeth to holding their teachers accountable. So although I appreciate what Board Member Earl shared, and it's true, it does add some additional burden to staff, it's us being responsive to the field.
Thank you. Member Hart.
I recently reflected on the fact that we heard this from one of the organizations as well, concerned about the number of rules and the number of expectations and monitoring those. And if you can't monitor it, you really shouldn't make the rule. And I don't think we're in a place to make this rule, partially for that reason, but also partially because at the end of the day, every district is different in terms of honors. And I am very concerned about the unintended consequences when we impose a rule onto systems that are so varied in their response to honors curriculum. I mean, you then start messing with teacher allotments and teacher training and schedules. And, I mean, this is a seemingly innocuous rule that this is exactly what trips up individual schools. And it creates confusion. It doesn't create clarity because individual schools and individual districts are in different places. So while we think we're creating clarity, I don't see it happening that way because it's not a process that is organic to the district. I understand the need for clarity, but I firmly believe that that belongs at the LEA level.
Member Lear?
I just wanted to ask for a clarification from Director Thronson. You said this was discussed in the superintendent's meeting, and was there universal support for this? And there were no superintendents, no representatives who were not supportive of this?
We have
Is
had
that
no
right?
dissent from the field. The board has been the dissent party.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to refresh my recollection. Thank you.
I'm just trying not to speak too much, being the chair, but I've been of a split opinion on this rule a little bit. I do think we changed some things in committee that were concerns from constituents that they wrote in about to make it better. The one piece that I feel like I have to support in a rule is the open enrollment piece, because I've had constituents contact me and say, you know, our LEA's gatekeeping our honors courses. And we've got kids performing at high levels that should be able to take these courses if they want to do the work, and they're not being allowed in. And we don't have a consistency in our pipeline, because in our board rule, if I understand already, we in rule have said that our AP and concurrent enrollment courses have to be open enrollment. So we don't have a piece consistent to that that says that our honors courses have to be open enrollment, that if a parent chooses that for their child and a child chooses to do that work, they can participate in the honors courses. So that's where I'm struggling with this. I mean, in my own internal struggle. Member Cannon?
I'm feeling an affinity for what you just expressed, and to my mind, one of the reasons to have this rule is that in several points in here, it talks about a school may not prohibit enrollment in an honors course based on a student's past performance, experience, or other measures. A school shall remove barriers and provide opportunities to students from all representative demographics to reach their academic potential. I think this is something new, and we enacted some rules about it a couple of years ago, and I think this is just reiterating to the field that there is a new expectation that all kids should be given opportunities to participate in honors courses, and I see there being value to the rule for that reason.
Thank you. Member Moss?
Just briefly, I agree with the comments just expressed about having it open. I worry, and again, I'm coming here as a parent, not a teacher, but I worry about the prescriptiveness and the way this might play out in the classroom. You know, an honors course may not emphasize rote memorization of basic recall or basic recall of facts. That from day to day, week to week, unit to unit might be part of, you know, a foundation of more deep learning. I worry that teachers will be chilled by some of the more prescriptive elements here, but I like the part about open enrollment. So I find myself having a tough time supporting the whole rule as presented.
Thank you. Member Lear?
No, I'm just waiting.
Okay, thank you. Member Booth?
I'm feeling like we're speaking out of both sides of our mouth when it comes to wanting feedback from the local educational leaders, and then determining when we're going to tell them what to do. If they want this, if they're 100% supportive, there's no reason in the world that our staff would have spent the time to come up with this rule, just to have another rule. If they need the help, if they need the support that a rule will provide them to, in the way that they determine to use that rule to put some teeth in the honors program that they're designing and delivering to their students in their local areas, then we need to provide that. And if they're for it, I can't understand why we would determine here around this table, after a cursory reading of what we've done in committee, why we would fight against the people that are out in the field doing it and who want this structure and this support to make sure that it's available and accessible for all students, and that it's going to do a better job than some are perceiving that it's doing at the present time.
Thank you. May I ask a question to you, Director Thronson? I didn't admittedly go back and reread the rule before this meeting because we spent so much time on it in committee. Can you remind us, are there any absolutes in this rule? Does the rule act as guidance except for the open enrollment piece? The open enrollment piece is the only absolute correctly that would even be able to be monitored, in my opinion. The rest acts as guidance because it's may not only use this, or may not, it's more guidance language. Is that?
Yeah, what we've seen, yes, and it's because what we're seeing in honors courses, the quality is not there in some settings where you can have an honors course and it's just a group of kids that had the privilege of being in that course, but the content is exactly the same as the non-honors course. And it is a pathway to future access. It's the data sheet that you have in this backup shows kids who don't get honors experience in middle school are not on track to experience early college coursework in high school at alarming rates. And so it really is a gatekeeper, and our practices don't go to what the evidence base is around who gets into honors. It's the system is, some school districts, and this might be why Board Member Hart doesn't feel the need, have said open enrollment to honors courses. Some have not. Some don't even have honors. We have a school district down south that 0%. There's not a single student in an honors course. It's not even an option. But what we find is if they do have honors, it is a gatekeeper for other students. And the quality of what's happening in an honors course, and when our superintendents read it, they're like, we want this in every class. And that's what our staff struggled with. We want that in every class too, but we've got to put some parameters around honors so we can raise the rigor of that course. And as we move into a personalized competency-based approach, honors courses really won't be necessary because you're going to meet the needs of kids. But at this time, this is our structure and system. Our data shows we are not serving kids best in the current model by saying, do what you want, LEAs, and our LEAs asked. As staff, we were hesitant. There's a lot of heat around honors courses. There's bumper stickers. We were like, are you sure? So we did a thorough survey. We went 18 months of work on this project to go back and forth to the field saying, here's what we're thinking, here's what the evidence says, what do you think? Brought the draft of the final policy to the superintendents, got their feedback. The support is there from the field, and they really have. It was not a staff desire, it was brought to us, and then we followed through to meet their needs. Obviously, up to you whether you want to meet their needs as well.
Thank you. Chair Lear, is your light still on for presenting?
Nope, just waiting, sorry, if I can take it out.
Thank you. There's a motion on the
I
floor.
have questions, if that's okay.
Member Earl?
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions. So if I'm understanding what you're saying, the districts want us to tell them how to do this. The districts want us to tell them how to do this.
Yes.
How
They
many
want
of
something
these,
to go back
how many
to.
of these superintendents took this before their local board and the local board would not touch it? I'm just wondering, how many of them took
We
it
didn't
before their
ask for
board?
that, so I don't know that any of them did.
Okay.
Or did not.
Correct.
Right. Local boards, and so I guess my other question is, the local boards want us to do this. The local boards are turning this over to us.
They have not reached out to me on anything of any concern at this time. And I don't know if
Okay.
you guys have heard any concern from local boards.
Just the
And what is,
superintendent.
last question, what is prohibiting them from doing this themselves? What's prohibiting a superintendent from doing this? From bringing it before their board and doing this?
It's consistency across LEAs. It's a potential loss of teacher staffing when you have different privileges in one community versus another. So if I'm in Jordan and Canyons has different practices, I might switch districts because of my belief system. This puts everyone on the same playing field.
Thank you. Member Moss?
A quick question, just referring to the field, and I did try to go through the backup, but some of these percentages of education leaders responding, you mentioned the superintendent's meeting. Were honors teachers or principals part of this survey or feedback from the field?
It was through.
Teachers of honors. I just had a hard time breaking down in the backup who exactly the field was.
We went to the directors of the content areas impacted by honors. So gifted and talented, math, science, world language, ELA. There's one or two more. I apologize, staff who helped on this. But we went to each content area that has honors courses and asked them, and then they were able to share that survey with others as they saw fit. So it was primarily directed at directors who then could share it out below or with others in their LEA.
District level.
Yes, correct, and charter.
Thank you. Member Hanson?
Maybe there's no one up. I just wanted to call the question.
Okay. Those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves R277-728 Honors Courses Draft 3 on second and final reading.
Did we vote on the substitute motion? Yeah, but
Oh, that's right. We have a substitute motion on the floor that is that the board send direct staff to create guidance in honors courses and best practices as opposed to a rule, as opposed to R277-728 in the honors courses area. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Will the ayes raise your hand? 5, 6. That motion fails, but will you leave your hands up, please, with members Belknap, Klein, Earl, Hart, Hymas, and Moss opposed. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves R277-728.
We're for that motion.
For that motion. Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves R277-728 Honors Courses Draft 3 on second and final reading. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will those in favor raise your, will those opposed raise your hands? Members Klein, Earl, Hart, Hymas, and Moss. Thank you. Chair Lear?
Are we ready for the?
Yes.
Oh, the last item, I'm sorry. Item 11.9, R277-496, K3 Reading Software License says, the motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board continue and approve R277-496, K12, Reading Software Licenses, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Member Earl? There's a motion on the floor as stated that the board approves R277-496 Draft 1 on second and final reading. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will the noes raise your hands? Board members Klein, Earl, and Hymas opposed.
And that completes our report.
Thank you. Chair Hansen?
First motion is item 13. Thank you. First item is item 13.4, the motion for the board. The committee recommends that the board approve the 2022 Instructional Materials Review Report for final approval.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those opposed say aye.
Don't say those opposed.
Say aye.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Those in favor.
Aye. Let's start over. There's a motion on the floor that the board approves the 2022 Instructional Materials Review Report for final approval. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Please raise your hands. Members Klein and Earl. Thank you.
Item 13.5, the committee recommends that the board approve R277469 Instructional Materials Review Report Draft 2 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously.
Item 13.6, the committee recommends that the board approve R277468, Parents' Review of Public Education Curriculum and Review of Compliant Process, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Member Klein, opposed? Member Cannon.
Yeah, as I was reading through this in our committee, sometimes it says compliant and sometimes it says complaint. I believe actually that complaint is the correct word, and I just wonder if we can correct that in the motion.
Can we
Is
correct
that-
that in the
will
motion?
staff
I probably read
verify
it
that?
compliant, didn't I?
Or did I read that wrong?
Yes, Jeff said.
Let's just make it correct in the motion. Is it compliant or complaint?
It's
No, it should be
complaint.
complaint
Complaint
process. I
process.
read it wrong.
Okay, complaint. That's
Yeah,
because it's
I'm
spelled
sorry.
wrong.
Yep, it came up. Spell check bounces those back and forth,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Okay.
So we're down to 13.11.
Yes, 13.11, the committee recommends that the board approve R277625, Mental Health Screeners, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Member Klein, opposed?
Item 13.12, the committee recommends that the board approve R277614, Athletes and Students with Head Injuries, Draft 2 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously.
Okay, we're on 13.13, motion for the board. The committee recommends that the board approve R277436, Gang Prevention and Intervention Programs in Schools, Draft 2 on second and final reading.
There's a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Member Klein, opposed? Passes. Do we need a 5-minute break before we move into this next
Yes, please.
Standards and Assessment Committee report?
Aye.
We don't have a report.
Oh, no, we don't have a report
We
from
don't
that
have a
one.
report. We're moving into executive.
No, it's exec next.
So shall we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, while we get set up for